Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, I guess, at this point. Thanks for joining us. We are here for National Speech Language Hearing Month webinar series. We're going to give just a few moments for people to trickle in from the waiting room before we get started. I'm going to share my slides in the interim. Please feel free to turn on captioning if you need it for this presentation today. It should be at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We are going to give folks maybe another minute just to trickle in before we get started. Thank you all for being here. We are the Tech Owl SLPs, and this is our May 2026 National Speech Language Hearing Month webinar series, Lunch and Learn. Today, we have a very exciting topic, Lives, Not Just Language, Supporting Engagement and Participation for Adult AAC Users. So let's jump into it. Just some logistics to get us started. Live transcription captioning is available via Zoom. If you have questions as we move along today, please type those in the Q&A, and we'll use the chat section for comments. I will take any questions at the end of the presentation, and there should be time, hopefully. Information about certificate requests will be provided at the end of the webinar. In order to receive your certificate, you must attend the entire webinar, and attendance will be verified via the Zoom record. Please give us a week to make your certificate. If you're putting in a request for that, we do them by hand, so it does take some time. Thank you for your patience with that. Also, if you see me looking down, that's because that's where my notes are. So that's what's going on. All right, let's jump into the content. So by the end of our session today, I'm hoping that participants will be able to identify the needs of emergent adult communicators who use AAC, describe barriers that impact participation and quality of life for emergent adult AAC users, and identify strategies to promote meaningful participation, support engagement, and expand communicative functions for adult AAC users. I'm speaking from the perspective of a speech-language pathologist working with adults in the state of Pennsylvania. I have a very small lens in comparison to the breadth of experiences and identities of individuals involved in this community. I will use a variety of identity-first and person-first language to accommodate both preferences throughout today's presentation. So I might say AAC user, or I might say a person who uses AAC. As always, please continue to educate yourself and listen to the voices of AAC users as the experts with lived experience. So we work for Tech Owl, and we'll start with a brief overview of what Tech Owl is. Tech Owl is Pennsylvania's Assistive Technology Act program, and we are housed within the Institute on Disabilities at Temple University. Every state and all territories in the United States have an AAT Act program whose mission it is to provide assistance and information in learning about assistive technology. AT Act programs also loan out assistive technology to trial and can help individuals acquire assistive technology. So these are some of our projects and programs at Tech Owl. The bolded ones are the core functions of an AT Act program. So a lending library, demonstrations and trainings, information and assistance, and the reuse program. As core functions, all state AT Act programs perform these 4 projects and programs. However, Tech Owl runs many other programs, including our fabrication 3D printing program, free special phone program, and ACES, which is our in-person intensive for adult AAC users. That's what this picture is of our previous ACES participants. Just some acronyms that I'll be using throughout the presentation today. AAC stands for Augmentative and Alternative Communication. Communication Partner, CP. DD will be Developmental Disability, DSP, Direct Support Professional. ID, Intellectual Disability. SGD, Speech Generating Device. And QOL, Quality of Life. So let's jump into talking about adult life. This presentation is focused on emergent adult communicators who may have a comorbid diagnosis of intellectual developmental disability in addition to a language impairment. So it's important to understand the changes in the societal lens of disability policy and legislation and culture that has changed the services and supports that adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities receive. In 1975, the social model of disability replaced the medical model, and the social model rejects the construct of disability and focuses on systemic and attitude barriers. The construct of disability has shifted from a defect or a pathology to an understanding of human functioning in the context of the environment. So information about adaptive behavior or intelligence offers a very limited understanding of a person's functioning and should be considered in collaboration with other dimensions of functioning, such as health, context, and participation. So it's really important that we examine participation and engagement for individuals with intellectual or developmental disability as highly individualized and requires multiple perspectives. Adults with intellectual and developmental disability are participated and they're integrated in the community more than ever. And participation and integration in a variety of settings and contexts is a key goal for many participants, for many teams and adults with disabilities. So this framework has really shifted from or to enhancing participation and engagement in the community, and using theoretical frameworks like the ecological theory and person-centered planning to dictate and evolve in how we see individuals with intellectual disability participating in society. The concept of quality of life remains at the center of person-centered planning, but quality of life as a concept remains relatively abstract. Shacklock and Vernengo are some of the core researchers in the quality of life field. And they aimed to examine the concept of quality of life and develop a singular theory that can be used for person-centered planning in the ID and DD space. They define it as a multidimensional phenomenon composed of core domains influenced by personal characteristics and environmental factors. This quality of life model attempts to capture the dimensions of each individual's life domain and situation and use them as a framework for improving personal outcomes. Since the 1980s and the shift of the supports that people with ID and DD receive, quality of life has been at the center of the person-centered planning framework as a principle for guiding service delivery policies and practices and exploring their impact on individual and environmental factors on quality of life. So Shacklock, Venengo, and their colleagues identified 8 domains of quality of life. That was kind of their definition. These are the 8 categories that they identified within 3 broader categories of independence, social participation, and well-being. So quality of life for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities happens when they receive support, opportunities, and resources to experience personal development, and when they're provided choices in the services that they receive and the opportunities to define how they want to live. Quality of life is also possible when social participation is at the forefront. People should have the opportunity to lead a life enriched by family and friends and have opportunities for intimate relationships based on consent. In the area of well-being, people should be provided the experience of meaningful work, volunteering, or community participation. They have the right to be fully informed about medical decisions and understand the risks and options for each decision that they choose. They should be provided the same rights and respect that for their dignity and privacy and that we receive, and the support to live in a safe and healthy environment. As we move forward through today's presentation, we're going to link some of these concepts as considerations for both support and barriers for our AAC users specifically. So my hope is that these can be a general framework for you to consider when thinking about the supports and also the barriers for participation and engagement for emergent adult AAC users. And the thread that really links these quality of life domains together is communication. As a basic need and a human right, communication inherently impacts quality of life. The functions of communication are central to the experience of human existence. Being able to communicate basic wants and needs, reject undesired activities or actions, describe things that we like or don't like, comment, ask and answer questions, describe feelings. These all affect every aspect of daily decision-making and overarching life goals. And there's very little research within the field about adults, specifically with communication disabilities, and the impacts on quality of life. There is a little bit of research for children on communicative competence and its relation to quality of life. And we do know from the research that individualized supports have been shown to enhance quality of life related outcomes for adults with intellectual disabilities. But it should be mindful that there's really limited attention and focus on this in the field right now. And so we're doing the best we can to try and draw the conclusions from our anecdotal experience and lived experience working with people with disabilities. So as a subsect of the larger population of individuals with intellectual or developmental disabilities, adult AAC users are often understudied in research and underserved in the field. So we'll be talking today specifically about emergent adult AAC users. So taking some lessons from the International Classification of Functioning Disability in Health, the ICF model from the World Health Organization, AAC use should be considered a special factor when thinking about individual functioning in an environment. Special attention is needed to note the multi-systemic factors at play in life participation, including intrinsic factors such as co-occurring sensory and motor conditions, attitudes or prior history with AAC, and the intersection of intellectual disabilities, communication disabilities, and the environment. In this model, communication modality is viewed as a personal factor that comes into play with those environmental factors, health conditions, and overall affects activity participation. The idea is that disability is a result of the mismatch of an individual's personal factors and their environmental factors. It is with this lens that we can reframe our perspective on overall participation in any given setting. So what is the point? This is the point. This comes from Dr. Janice Light and David McNaughton's article in 2015. Communication is not an end goal in and of itself. Rather, it is a tool to allow individuals to participate effectively and attain their goals at home, at school, at work, or in the community. Communication cannot be confined as a benchmark to be met or a series of short-term goals. Communication is a thread that is interwoven into each of the domains of quality of life. When we view communication holistically, it becomes less about mastery of a device, a language system, or achieving a benchmark. And communication becomes integral to participation and goal attainment. Effective communication becomes an access to improving quality of life. So what do our emergent adult AAC users need specifically? These are adapted from the National Joint Committee for the Communication Needs of Persons with Severe Disabilities Bill of Rights. This document outlines the fundamental communication rights for people with severe communication disabilities across the lifespan. More broadly, our AAC users need access to dignity and respect in interactions, meaningful communication, receiving a response to all communication modalities, participation across settings, building interactions socially and relationships, express preferences, share opinions, make choices, express wants and needs, and have access to AAC and their services across the lifespan. Within their AAC systems more specifically, adults need access to adult vocabulary. So often I've met with teams that have an individual whose device has vocabulary for art or homeroom, something left over from the school, and they really need a makeover to have access to slang, employment-related vocabulary, advocacy, or community-related vocabulary on their device. Training and support for the stakeholders is also a crucial need for this population. The number referenced in the research is that adults with complex communication needs that reside in residential settings may have up to 15 personal care assistants working with them throughout the week. That's 15 people who need support, who need training, who need to know how to use and operate this equipment. We need to make sure that staff working with people with disabilities and who use AAC feel supported and knowledgeable of the equipment and how to use it. AAC users also need the ability to access a variety of AAC tools across the settings. Not only just their high-tech device, they should feel able and empowered to use the modality that best suits their needs and preferences in the demands of a specific environment. Additionally, we need to make sure that we're providing continued opportunities to reevaluate current AAC tools and systems. Just because an AAC system has worked in the past doesn't mean it will continue to meet people's needs. AAC users are subject to the same growth, change, and transition in life that we all face, and dynamic evaluation of current tools is necessary to ensure that the device is still a good fit. So communication is at the core of life participation. Opportunities for participation support engagement in life, which improves quality of life outcomes. So in this way, it's that communication is really at the center and is interwoven across these concepts. It's up to us as support systems to provide the framework for emergent AAC users to have opportunities to effectively communicate a variety of communicative functions across environments. Rejecting and requesting is great, but it doesn't meet everybody's needs alone. All communication functions, including special attention to communication for relationship building, is essential for improving quality of life and overall engagement. There are a number of large barriers to life participation for AAC users as it stands today. At the system-wide level, there are inconsistencies and gaps in existing laws and regulations surrounding the specific rights of AAC users. Not all countries maintain protection for people with disabilities, and enforcing existing laws and regulations can be a challenge. In addition, individuals may not receive AAC services due to existing procedures or conventions of education, employment, or healthcare systems. Professionals might be lacking in their professional knowledge of making recommendations for AAC, or there might be a lack of professionals at all that can provide these services. Marginalized individuals living at the intersection of disability and race, socioeconomic status, geographic location, gender, and other factors may be at higher risk for not having access to AAC services. In a survey of 500 SLPs, 74% of respondents indicated that they did not feel prepared to provide AAC services. It's also worth mentioning that up to 90% of students with complex communication needs enter adulthood without acquiring functional literacy skills. There's a gap in the education system that undermines individuals with ID and DD using AAC from achieving a number of goals and working towards quality of life domains by not being provided access to literacy skills. Now, there's not much we can do about the current landscape societally, and many environments are not set up for participation by our AAC users. Less than 15% of individuals who have complex communication needs are employed even part-time. Overall, data is lacking in the research about adults with complex communication needs who are engaged in employment, post-secondary education, or community activities. However, we do know that time constraints and lack of training continue to remain a large barrier for this population. David McNaughton references in his work that only 18% of service plans for adults with ID list employment as a goal. And part of this might be derived from government benefits that will be lost if income reaches a certain level. So there's a lot of barriers that are just generally out of our control. So how can we support AAC users to participate? Knowing all of these barriers, what can we do to help them participate in life and therefore improve overall quality of life measures? The first consideration today we'll talk about is AAC system design. In the past 30 plus years of the AAC field, we've made great strides to provide AAC technology to users who have limited language and literacy skills. AAC provides a standardized and intelligible output of messages to a communication partner. However, much of the framework of these systems has remained unchanged since the 80s. Since the 80s, vocabulary has been organized in a grid-based system with pictures that represent concepts, alone in isolation on a grid. AAC systems were developed by people without disabilities and are designed for the communication partners to understand and receive an AAC user's message. Complex concepts are taken out of context and represented by symbols that were designed by people without language disability. The expectation is then that the AAC device becomes a tool both to communicate a message and also to learn language. AAC symbols are created by companies and designed by predominantly white, middle-class, English-speaking, non-disabled people. Recent research has shown that these picture symbols don't align with the way that autistic and non-autistic children draw concepts. It's assumed that these pictures are easy to learn, but these concepts are difficult to represent through a symbol alone. The reality is that this framework does not support language growth from pre-linguistic to symbolic communication, and the conceptual meaning of target vocabulary often leaves something to be desired. When you take language concepts out of context, meaning gets muddled, and there's a high demand on our AAC users to understand and generalize these concepts across their environments. There are a number of design factors of an AAC system that can be considered when matching an AAC system to a user. Systemic organization of language can vary from system to system. Some vocabulary is organized by category, schema, parts of speech, or alphabetically. And there's limited research on visual attention and visual processing of individuals with intellectual and developmental disability. It's possible that these systems can be challenging to look at. These displays often contain many colors, different symbols, background colors, and subfolders, can produce and pose an additional learning challenge. Additionally, the vocabulary itself is often selected by manufacturers, therapists, or in congruence with a set of existing standards about what people without disabilities use in spoken speech. A core vocabulary approach provides access to function words that might be produced in the later stages of language development, but it doesn't represent personal, meaningful vocabulary that are important for early language learners. For our non-literate or pre-literate AAC users, pictures and symbols are the primary way in which folks are interacting with the system. However, these symbols are conceptualized by non-disabled adults. Furthermore, these symbols attempt to represent concepts that exist inherently contextually in language, and conceptualizing them in isolation is challenging. For example, the concept up, which is usually represented by an arrow, can have vastly different meanings depending on its context. The field of AAC also continues to have immense challenges with providing culturally appropriate and diverse representation of vocabulary and concepts, as well as voice output. Dialectal variations, tonal changes, and code switching remain challenging, if not impossible, within existing AAC systems. Many users involved in research have highlighted the feeling of social isolation as a result of using picture symbols to communicate. There's a feeling of underrepresentation between the broader cultural group and the societal mismatch between typical linguistic variations. Traditional AAC systems by design place a high learning demand on users. Concepts are represented by vocabulary, which is selected by the manufacturer, and then represented by a picture, which is conceptualized by a non-disabled adult, and arranged on a grid. Vocabulary comes pre-programmed and may or may not meet an individual's needs across settings. Since high-tech AAC and AAC intervention largely focuses on communication in the present moment and immediate environment, accessing past tense concepts and anticipating future vocabulary becomes a burden for communication partners that is often left unmet. Some of these factors might not be concerns for children who started AAC at a young age, but for our emergent adult users, aided AAC becomes a tool that requires a significant amount of cognitive functioning, including working memory, sustained attention, self-monitoring, and planning. Our adults who are introduced to high-tech AAC later in life may have years of experience communicating using personalized and individualized modalities. I hear from teams all the time, I know that when she turns her head to the right and purses her lips, it means she's uncomfortable. Expecting or anticipating that a high-tech system will completely outweigh these learned communication strategies is unrealistic. And I think that there's room at the communication table for both high-tech AAC and also body language, gestures, scripts, or facial expressions. Either of these can meet an individual's need in a given setting or context. So bringing it back to our quality of life domains, how does system design come into play within the quality of life framework? These are just some questions to get you thinking about the role of the AAC system in supporting quality of life for our emergent adult AAC users. Does the AAC system include vocabulary for advocacy? Does language organization vocabulary in the interface design support involvement and participation? Can the AAC system support dynamic and changing social interactions? Is there support for code switching or multilingual access if needed? And do AAC users have access to vocabulary to make choices, reflect personal values, and express consent? We're often limited by what AAC companies will make. Many apps don't support some of these factors in a way we might like, but this can be a conversation that you start to have with your teams and identify where the system is not meeting these needs and how you can make changes. So what can we do in the area of AAC system design to support lives and not just language? Multimodal communication, including aided and unaided AAC, supports participation. We need to reduce the overemphasis on aided AAC to be the answer for all of our emergent adult communicators across all environments. Consider using apps like GoTalkNow or Snapseed or Pictello as supports for existing grid-based vocabulary system. The average smartphone user right now is using 9 apps a day, 45 unique apps a month. And we expect our emergent adult communicators to get all of their needs met with a single app alone. We also need to make sure that existing AAC devices are personalized, accessible, and portable. Collaborate with team members across environments to ensure that vocabulary is meaningful and can be added promptly. Teams can ensure that AAC systems are designed for the real-world settings and real-world use, taking the device outside of the therapy room, outside of the contrived therapy interactions, and using it in real time. Visual scene displays can be used in conjunction with existing grid-based language system and other personal modalities. VSDs can be supportive for participation in community activities, including recreation, volunteer, and employment. Communication partners can be taught to program vocabulary on visual scene displays in real time, also called just-in-time programming. And VSCs can be created with videos instead of pictures. And actually, there's a lot of emerging research in this area that indicates that this can be supportive for communication in new contexts, as well as overall participation. Video VSCs can serve as a standalone message. For example, in this picture, having the bookshelf be a message of, can you tell me where the history books are? Or it can serve as a model for what an individual might say if they want to use their verbal speech or other communication modality. There are limitations for accessing robust and complex language using VSCs alone, but they can be part of a robust communication system and a tool in the tool belt. Now we're going to look at the area of communication partner training next. And this is one of the largest and most vital areas where our emergent adult communicators need support. So communication is transactional. Both parties must be able to send and receive messages, and successful communication relies on both parties interacting together. Because of this, stakeholders need education and training in high-tech AAC operation, position, and interaction and communication styles. Communication partners' attitudes about a person needing AAC and their own biases can also be directly related to the integration and use of AAC across the environment and may need to be addressed. What are the barriers for communication partners when interacting with adults with intellectual or developmental disabilities? Adina Hanley and her colleagues reviewed the literature on the experiences of communication partners communicating with adults with ID or DD and identified 4 barriers. We know that communication partners and DSPs, direct support professionals, have a high workload and are asked to complete many care-related tasks. High demand for providing physical care can lead to missed opportunities to identify subtle communication signals or communicate. Additionally, access remains a challenge. Access to professionals, access to equipment, and access to training. 75% of staff indicated that AAC devices were not always available to individuals. And only 40% of staff could describe the current way that their adults that they're working with communicate. That's a really significant number. Again, thinking about our folks who might live in a residential setting, if you have 15 staff and only 40% of them can tell somebody else how that individual communicates, there's a major knowledge barrier and access to information. And we know that communication style and interaction with AAC users can either inhibit or promote communication. So controlling interaction styles such as asking close-ended questions, frequent interruptions, and providing few opportunities for users to start conversations can affect the two-way dynamic of interactions. Additionally, attitudes and internalized ableism can be barriers for communication partners. Hanley discussed in her work that less than 50% of staff realized or believed that changing their own communication method would improve the communication of adults with intellectual disabilities. There's a gap in folks understanding that the way that they communicate is going to affect the way somebody communicates back with them. One other survey Hanley references in her work is that only 25% of staff in a survey expected an adult with intellectual disability to communicate at all. So there's really low expectations about abilities and performance. So she then did an analysis of 8 studies and looked at communication partners' experience and identified 4 themes. So when the training was provided on the AAC by SLPs, DSPs felt like they understood the concepts better and they felt that they were more confident using AAC across settings. Knowledge of an individual using AAC was also an important factor for AAC use. So support staff who feel like they know somebody really well might say, hey, let's go get your device. It's clear you're trying to tell me something. On the other hand, if somebody knows their adult AAC users really well, they might say, oh, I know what they're trying to communicate. I don't need their device. So it could be, it's a double-edged sword in terms of the support that folks are providing. And as we discussed earlier, kind of one of the larger barriers for communication partners is the attitudes and buy-in from staff. Staff need to share a commitment that this goal of communication is important, it's valuable, it's at the center of participation, it's at the center of quality of life. And this may involve larger conversations that need to be had about deeply rooted ableism or education about disability. Hanley discussed that SLPs did not collaborate with caregivers as often as expected when doing AAC interventions. And this can really lead to a mismatch of the device with the capabilities of the team to support. DSPs and other team members are such a valuable piece of intervention, and their input and perceptions need to be taken into consideration. We'd be remiss to not talk about device abandonment and how the role of buy-in from staff and buy-in from teams plays in devices not getting used and not getting brought out. There also needs to be decisions and conversations about team members' roles and responsibilities in AAC training, knowledge, and use. Unclear roles and responsibilities leads to mismatches in support and threatens access to AAC across settings. DSPs, direct support professionals, often are the primary communication partners for many of our adults within all settings. They should be considered an integral part of the process. Consultation with DSPs results in increased commitment to the communication intervention. We're working together on this goal, and they're more likely to use the device to support folks when they're involved and they're aware of the advantages to using the equipment. It's critical that others believe that everyone has the right to be heard and to be supported in communication. So bringing this back to our quality of life domains, how does communication partner instruction and the communication partner relationship come into play? These are some questions to start to ask yourselves when you're contemplating the impact of communication partners on quality of life. Are low expectations by others affecting an individual's ability to access the resources to explore how they want to live? Are communication partners inhibiting or promoting social inclusion? Do they recognize opportunities for communication and provide time and space for folks to respond or initiate? Are AAC users provided access to daily routines or activities that are meaningful to them? And are communication partners using interaction strategies that promote autonomy and choice-making across environments? So what can we do to support lives and not just language? We need to shift the framework that AAC is the best option in all settings to AAC as is an option in some settings. But staff and stakeholders need education in each individual's unique communication profile. Body movements, facial expressions, vocalizations, and gestures serve unique communication purposes. Instead of asking people with ID or DD to communicate with us using our preferred and standardized measures, perhaps the onus is on the stakeholders and the team to adjust ourselves and the environment to be supportive of these unique communication modalities. There is room at the table for both. There is room for celebration and honoring individuals' diverse communication styles, and also exploring and using high-tech aided AAC. Communication partners also need instruction in effective interaction skills, such as modeling and wait time. These skills can be taught by describing the strategies, modeling, rehearsing, and practicing the strategy with the team and with the AAC users. And there's emergent research to show that both telepractice and asynchronous modules can be effective and supportive for teaching some of these communication partner strategies. And as you continue the dialogue on your teams regarding AAC use and communication partner instruction, it's possible that larger conversations need to be had about expectations, disability, history, and ableism. Communication partner training can be documented in the ISP, and this is a really great way to help keep folks accountable for the outcomes for AAC use and which team members specifically are responsible. Training should be explicit in device operation, setup, creating communication opportunities, implementing plans, and increasing positive interactions. We need to make sure that documentation is collected in one place for everybody to access, the warranty of the device, the login information, steps for editing, and any relevant consultant information if you've been working with one. When we're teaching stakeholders and communication partners, AAC implementation strategies need to be flexible, they need to be uncomplicated, easy to implement, and delivered in multiple formats. Again, consider telepractice or asynchronous as a way to deliver this in multiple formats. Staff should be provided in multiple modalities, getting a written description of the target strategies. What is wait time? What's the definition of modeling? And then also video demonstrations if they needed, or given the opportunity to role play with each other or practice with each other or with an individual with disabilities. AAC implementation and good partner strategies are not something that can just be read in a book. They need to be taught and retaught and experienced in multiple modalities with scaffolded support. So making it as easy as possible for teams to have access to the information that they need. We're going to talk about our final area of support, environmental support. So I am kind of a nerd about theory and stuff, so this is a little like in the weeds. The ecological theory is a way to look at this framework where the person with a disability is at the center of these 5 nested systems, and all of the spheres have it's bidirectional, so they influence each other and they influence themselves. We tend to think of the environment as like the mesosystem layer, the green layer in this, which is like family and school, neighborhoods. And there are larger systems that we exist in. We discussed communication partners already, which kind of fall at that like microsystem level. Unfortunately, we aren't able to control some of these larger systems like the exosystem, which is like the government or religion or education. We aren't able to control the macro system, the overarching beliefs and values of society as a whole. But within this model, it's helpful to think about the person with a disability at the center, and the surrounding spheres compound and engaged or bidirectionally with each other. So our folks with disabilities aren't just affected by their environment, they're also affecting it, which is really like a nice reframe. And there are a lot of different environments in that mesosystem layer that people might engage in: recreation, employment, community services, education opportunities, volunteering, and healthcare. However, there are some factors that we need to consider. We know that there are limited and less opportunities for emergent adult communicators to participate in recreation, volunteering, employment, and communication or community activities. Common barriers include transportation challenges, opportunity barriers, and technology barriers. Accessible transportation remains a large challenge for accessing AAC services such as evaluation and treatment, as well as accessing recreation and community services. Finding staff and finding accessible transportation can be a challenge, and comorbid medical or behavior needs can also pose a challenge to transportation. Additionally, mainstream technology is more commonly becoming a barrier to environmental participation. Despite the strides in the AAC field and providing access to high-tech aided AAC, our AAC users are not being given the same opportunities to learn or access mainstream technology. Accessibility features, the rise of AI, these things are still being developed, and their overall implications on this population is still up in the air. But we know that without access to mainstream technology, our folks are going to get further and further behind. There's this unspoken expectation that technology like AAC can cure or solve the problem of disability rather than view it as an assistive tool. And it's on us to recognize this bias in our own interactions with people with ID and DD and recognize how mainstream technology can bridge that gap. So again, bringing it back to our quality of life considerations from earlier, how do environmental supports and the environments that folks live in impact quality of life considerations? How do existing policy and practice barriers affect emergent AAC users' access to steady income? What prevailing social attitudes are acting as barriers to participation? Has appropriate education been provided about healthcare, personal care, and nutrition? Are AAC users informed about healthcare options and risks? And is funding a barrier to access community supports, communication devices, or other services? So how can we support lives and not just language in the area of environmental supports? First, we need to be advocates. We need to be advocates for funding for assistive technology, housing, adequate staffing, and community-based supports. Now more than ever, we need to make our voices heard to advocate for the supports of our emergent adult communicators. We also need to advocate for proper staff training and retraining. Again, 15 people in a week, all of those people need to be trained. We need to avoid limiting AAC users to a single app or a single piece of technology. Consider apps that help you share pictures, like the Photos app, or play games or video call as a supplement to existing AAC systems. Social interaction and interaction is the point of communication. Mainstream technology can be used to support engagement without explicitly placing demands on communicating wants and needs. We can embed AAC into daily routines. Structure is going to be your friend here. Daily routines and familiar environments are breeding grounds for embedded communication opportunities. Instead of asking yourself, why isn't this person communicating in this setting? Instead, ask, what is it about this setting that's holding this person back from participating? Now, we can be doing everything right. We can have a system that's designed and supportive for folks to access their wants and needs. We can learn and educate communication partners on how to use it and also how to understand their unique communication needs. And also, these psychosocial variables can still have a huge impact on communicative interactions. Factors such as sensory needs, competence, attitudes, intrinsic motivation to use AAC, prior history with technology, resilience to persevere through communication breakdowns. These factors can vary a lot between communication partners and environments, but they can be a big factor. And research is deeply limited on this topic, but anecdotally we know, it's without a doubt a factor for individuals using AAC. Most adults with ID and DD who are new to AAC or have experienced device abandonment may have spent years establishing communication using personalized communication modalities, gestures, body language, etc. They have that and it works. And it's our job to be mindful that these personal factors and that history matters. We can train others, set up systems, and create fruitful environments, but still it doesn't stick. What are some other considerations? We're going to kind of fly by these. But some other considerations: interpersonal relationships can often be overlooked. We're so focused on getting wants and needs met, using communication to support behavior regulation, that we're missing out on the social isolation that many of our emergent adult AAC users may experience. People with ID and DD are more likely to engage in passive solo activities. Unlike you or I, they might not have access to mainstream technology to access long-distance relationships. Somebody finishes high school and moves to a group home that's 30 minutes away from family that they lived with their whole life, and they don't have access to any way to communicate with them outside of in-person, face-to-face visits. That can be really socially isolating. So we need to model and we need to show relationship maintenance skills, teach people how to video call, how to share photos, how to interact with others. Addition, healthcare is going to be a huge factor for this population. The transition from pediatric to adult-centered medical providers can be a huge hurdle to jump over that has years worth of implications. Developmental pediatricians can serve as a great resource, but finding providers who have knowledge of adults with disabilities can be challenging. And looping back in system design, we need to make sure that healthcare-related vocabulary is on there and is modeled. Strategies to support also include practicing healthcare interactions and using visual supports to address healthcare topics and advocacy. At the end of the day, communication does not happen in a bubble, and AAC, aided AAC, is not a one-size-fits-all solution. Communication is interactive, it is bidirectional, and perhaps it's never really independent. Maybe independence is never really the goal. In the area of AAC research, much of our intervention is focused on the deficits of AAC users rather than the communication partners or attitudinal or societal barriers that exist. In the same vein, AAC interventions focus on requesting or rejecting, and that social interaction piece is often neglected. We can start by evaluating systems, communication partners, and environments to identify where participation gaps exist and reframe how we provide supports going forward. Because two things can be true at the same time. We can encourage high-tech AAC, we can make sure it's accessible, we can train communication partners in how to use it, and at the same time, we can also validate and accept individual, unique communication modalities. We can confront our own biases about expectations about AAC and expectations about the individual, and we can also examine the context and the environment in which an individual exists as a way to support or not support multimodal communication. AAC system design, communication partner instructions, and environmental supports can be both a barrier and a facilitator for improving quality of life outcomes. We can promote meaningful participations by identifying strengths and needs in these areas. There is room for diversity in communication contexts and aided AAC. Both body language, idiosyncratic and unconventional communication modalities, all of it can fit into a meaningful life and meaningful participation. As partners, stakeholders, and friends of adults with ID or DD using AAC, we can begin to reframe our intentions from language objectives to lives. We can examine our own interactions, societal barriers, and environmental flaws as a mismatch with our AAC users, and begin to cultivate settings and interactions that reflect back a holistic view of human life. These are all of the references from today's presentation, some really fascinating research out there. I highly recommend taking a peek if you'd like more information on this topic. There's a lot more to be said. This is our social media information. Please follow us if you don't already. We have some great content. I can't speak to TikTok, although I hear it's great over there. And our contact information, we are housed within the Institute on Disabilities at Temple University. And this is the first webinar in this series. So we have 3 more to go. Next week, we'll be talking about the right to not remain silent, AAC in the court and legal systems. If you haven't signed up already, there's the link for you. It's going to be wonderful. And here is the survey request form. Please complete the survey to say that you've attended the entire webinar and training. We will verify attendance with the Zoom record. Please give us a week before you email about certificates. We are working hard to get them for you, and I'm happy to take any questions if any came through.
Cassie, so someone had asked about the apps that you mentioned when you were suggesting using more than one app. They believe GoTalk was one of them, but they can't recall the rest of them. Do you have those available?
Yeah, I think I referenced Snapseed and Pictello.
Great. And then someone else asked, are there specific resources you use when providing education about disability to DSPs and caregivers who come from a different cultural background or lens of disability?
Really great question. If you email me, I'd be happy to share some resources with you.
Great. And this last one, it says, do you have any local resources for adult AAC evaluations? If the individual, it's Lars, if you can let us know what local is for you, we'd be better able to answer.
Yes. And this is our contact information. My name's Cassie. You can email me if you have additional questions after you chew on this information for a while. But that will be pretty much it.
Someone asked, can you please show the QR code again?
Yes, of course. We'll try and go back. There we go. Awesome. Well, thank you all for being here today. If there are no more questions, feel free to log off. We'll see you next week. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you for sharing this hour with us today. And that will be it. Thank you, everyone.